If you've got a mortgage, brace yourself, because in less than 48 hours, you're almost certain to be hit with another interest rate rise. It'll be a record 10th increase in a row. That phrase, "we live in interesting times," has really become an awful curse. The Reserve Bank says the pain is all because we have to get inflation under control. Otherwise, our economy will be truly stuffed. But what if the experts have got it wrong? What if there's a better way to beat inflation than by smashing families already trapped in a financial vice? Nick and Sam Knoll planted a veggie patch during COVID lockdowns as a hobby, never expecting that sourcing produce from here would one day become a cost-cutting necessity.
Just, you should be able to pull that one gently off. Just give it a little bit of a twist. Yeah.
When they first bought their dream home in 2018 at Penrith in Western Sydney, they were elated. These days, their main emotion is the dread that comes on the first Tuesday of every month as the Reserve Bank hikes interest rates.
We've gone from no rate rises till 2024 to we're just going to keep going.
And so what sort of discretionary spending have you had to cut out now?
It's taking the kids places. So, you know, going to play mini golf, going out to a pool, going to see a movie.
Movies, yeah.
I mean, and that's hardly living the high life.
Yeah,
like, it's just taking the kids to the movies.
And that's exactly it. The things that go first are sometimes the easiest pleasures.
4 times 1 equals 4, and you write them out and go down the page.
The one upside for the kids is that Mum is now very good at helping with maths homework because she's used to constantly crunching the numbers. But the downsides are many, because like families across Australia who've been told to tighten their belts, well, they simply can't get their finances any tighter.
It doesn't feel good, really. Like, I mean, I want to be able to give my kids everything that they want. And now, you know, you've got to say, oh, so we can't do that. We don't have enough money. And you just sort of see their little faces.
You can't explain rate rises to a 6-year-old.
Do you think the Reserve Bank gets that? Like, this is the impact that it has?
I don't think they do. I'm not an emotional person, usually. But when you sit down and you think about it and you sit down and you talk about it, it's just worried.
Right now, Australia is facing its biggest economic challenge in decades. And the most pressing issue of all is out-of-control inflation. There are many causes for that, but when it comes to the Reserve Bank, there's only one solution: raising interest rates.
If they didn't tackle inflation, then inflation would kind of get away from us, like a genie in a bottle.
Sherelle Murphy is the chief economist at Ernst & Young Australia. She says monetary policy is a one-trick pony. Like it or not, the only way the Reserve Bank can tackle inflation is by raising interest rates. So in your mind, the simple fact is you need to take a hit now to avoid an explosion down the track.
That's right. It's like if the Australian economy was like the patient, you know, interest rates and the medicine doesn't taste good, and sometimes it takes a while to kick in, but eventually when it does kick in, the patient recovers and we get on with life.
So the idea of raising interest rates to get people to spend less of their disposable income?
That's right. So if the Reserve Bank takes away effectively some of our disposable income, we might think twice about the holiday or the renovation, and that will, again, cool the economy down.
But aren't the people with the most disposable income people that have already paid off their mortgage?
Yes.
So this whole policy completely misses them?
It does, and this is one of the very unfortunate parts of monetary policy. It is a big blunt tool, and it's quite unfair.
So it's mortgage holders that are copping so much of the punishment for our entire nation's wild spending. But it may surprise you to learn that this is actually a relatively small cohort that's having the clamps applied to it. There are around 10 million dwellings in Australia. Now, of those, just under a third are owned outright, and another 30% are rented out by investors. That means there's only 3.3 million households right now that have an owner-occupied mortgage. It's a very small subsection of Australia's population of 26 million that's actually getting hit hard right now.
Yeah, and that's the problem with monetary policy that the Reserve Bank manages. It's not the Reserve Bank's fault. That's the mandate they got. They have no other weapon or weaponry other than interest rates to fight inflation, which is their goal: fix inflation.
Few people are as synonymous with the home loan caper as Mark Bouris. The chairman of Yellow Brick Road is adamant that everyday Australians are being unfairly punished for high inflation, which he believes can be blamed on poor decisions by governments at state and federal levels, as well as the Reserve Bank.
Milton Friedman, one of the most famous economists of all time, said in the 80s and 90s, consumers are not responsible for inflation, governments are. If I load you up with a whole lot of cash that you didn't earn, as we did during the COVID period, and I encourage banks to lend you money at 2% by giving them money very, very cheap, you do not feel in any way guilty about spending it. No wonder they're going to overbid, because they're bidding with money they didn't earn. What bothers me is the Reserve Bank should know this psychological analysis or profiling of people who borrow money. The government should know this.
Independent research is sort of saying that southwest Sydney is going to be hit the hardest when it comes to reductions in prices, when it comes to house prices, and also this is where the independent research is expecting to see the most distress amongst mortgage holders.
Everyone agrees we have a problem right now, but there's little consensus on how we fix it. For Mark Bouris, the squeeze on interest rates is bound to result in not just mortgage stress, but also job losses. So what do you think is more problematic, higher interest rates or higher inflation?
For me, I think right now, the higher interest rates is a problem.
He says the dependence on interest rates as a cure-all for our economic issues is an outdated approach, and for now, Australia needs to stop panicking about inflation. So you think we've just got to learn to live with a bit higher inflation?
For the short term, yeah, because we have extraordinary circumstances. We've got a war, we've had floods, we've had droughts, we've had supply chain issues, we had China's closed down for a period of time because of its COVID policy. A lot of stuff that we import comes from those places. We also import inflation from the US and Europe. These very extraordinary periods.
So we're using 1990s policy, but we've got a 2023 situation.
100%.
I think it's a very painful way of fighting inflation, and I think there are alternatives.
They're frosty financial times in the United States at the moment as well, where Isabella Weber is based as an economics professor at the University of Massachusetts. She is another leading mind who thinks the current inflation rate is a unique challenge, and Australia is going about tackling it the wrong way. What do you think when you see continual interest rate rises like we've had in Australia?
It's a way of fighting inflation that often makes the people who have suffered from inflation most suffer once more. The idea of using interest rate to tackle inflation is a very roundabout way of going about it. It's a bit like as if you had a fire in your kitchen and you were going to flood your whole house. So therefore, I think given the nature of the inflation that we have been observing, it would be better to choose more targeted measures rather than to simply rely on interest rate hikes.
The professor says she has solutions. Firstly, she believes governments need to get serious about taxing big businesses in Australia, many of whom are recording record profits. She also wants to see further price caps introduced on gas and oil. She's adamant these are not only better, but more importantly, faster ways to bring down inflation.
The German central bank, the Bundesbank, estimates that this measure is bringing down inflation by 1.5 percentage points in Germany, so this is quite significant. Due to the enormous pain that is being induced by interest rate hikes, I think governments should step up and should be creative and try to devise surgical tools to deal with the kind of inflation that we are facing today.
But perhaps fixing the future lies in looking to the past. when Australia last faced soaring inflation in the 1990s. Do you remember what the interest rate was when you took charge of the Reserve Bank? Every cloud has a silver lining, and for Silver Fox, Neil Edwards, and so many other retirees around the country, interest rate rises are a good news story. How are you feeling on the first Tuesday of each month at the moment?
Well, I do look forward to it in anticipation, because every time the rate does go up a little bit, it secures my financial future. It gives us a little bit more in the piggy bank and something to spend. So it helps us in retirement.
What better way to spend your money than sailing your own boat? Neil isn't trying to rub it in the faces of those who are battling to keep their heads above water in the midst of record interest rate rises. Instead, he's trying to provide motivation. His advice is work hard, and eventually it'll be smooth sailing for you as well.
In the late 80s, when interest rates hit 17.5%, went through that. You know, I sacrificed a fair bit when I was younger to put a few dollars away for the rainy day, and now we've got the sunshine now, so we're very happy there.
Do you feel sorry for young people at the moment?
Oh, look, I do, because I don't think it was entirely their fault that they've had to borrow at such low rates and then have this huge increase. But my advice to them now is take the pain and you'll get the gain.
Do you remember what the interest rate was when you took charge of the Reserve Bank?
I remember it very clearly. The cash rate then was 18%. 18%.
Bernie Fraser was Reserve Bank Governor for one of our most turbulent financial periods in the early 90s. He copped a lot of flack back then, just like current RBA Governor Philip Lowe.
Can you explain to the renters and mortgage holders of Australia why you still deserve to hold your job?
But Bernie Fraser believes people need to back off, saying that if history teaches us anything, it's that the RBA knows what it's doing. What happens if the Reserve Bank starts to lose some of its independence?
Well, that's the main thing that worries me, that there is pressure. My concern really has been that the concerns about the miscalculation by Phil Lowe and his fellow directors on the no change in interest rates over the period out to 2024 has led to a good deal of angst on the part of the people who have been affected by that. But other people have seen it as an opportunity to knock the bank, give the bank, not just Phil, but give the bank a makeover, and that's what I find rather worrying at the present time.
Bernie Fraser achieved something rare as RBA Governor. He reduced inflation while simultaneously reducing interest rates. But the reason for that is simple. Australia fell into a recession. Then Treasurer Paul Keating infamously described it as the recession we had to have. It was a brutal blow to our economy. And now, after more than 30 straight years of economic growth, the fear is we could, once again, go into recession. Finance guru Mark Burris thinks it's a real possibility and warns some other experts actually believe that would be the quickest way to crush inflation. 1990s was the recession we had to have. Do we need a recession?
Sometimes they want to shock people out of their spending habits. Now, no Reserve Bank governor is ever going to say that, no Treasurer is ever going to say that. Paul Keating said it, but look what it did with Paul. He ended up losing an election because he said it and the media just jumped all over him. How do we stop someone who's got money on deposit? How do we stop them from spending money? How do we stop them from spending?
Well, how do you?
You shock them with a recession. You make them think, whoa, a recession, hang on, what's going on here? Maybe we better stop spending a little bit because something could happen.
How worried are you about the R word?
Oh, look, we don't expect there to be a recession in the Australian economy. The Treasury forecasters, the Reserve Bank and others are not expecting a recession. But I need to be upfront with your viewers and say that we do expect our economy to slow considerably.
Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers is confident history isn't going to repeat. Do you see similarities between now and what happened in the early 90s?
Oh, there's absolutely no chance that interest rates will get to the level that they were at in the early 1990s. I want to make that clear.
Yeah, well, we're all if that happens.
Is that going to get a go in the show, you reckon, that Tom's response?
The Treasurer accepts the government has a role to play in lowering inflation and told us there will be cuts to several sectors in May's budget, as well as subsidy packages for families that are struggling. But the Treasurer and his government are still committing to introducing the controversial Stage 3 tax reforms, which are set to come into force next year. Now, under those changes, there will be hefty tax cuts, particularly for high-income earners, adding an extra $250 billion in cash to our economy over the first decade. An inflationary measure, if ever there was one.
There are a range of views about what we should do about that out in the community. I get...
But how do you marry that up, though? That people who are well off aren't feeling the brunt of inflation at the moment, and you're going to give them tax breaks on top of that.
Well, the best thing that we can do in the period between now and when those tax cuts come in is to make sure where we can afford to give some cost of living relief. We're talking about the next 12 months or so when inflation is at its most challenging. And so that's how we try and do it. That's our focus.
But on those high income people, I mean, they're laughing all the way to the bank, literally, and to Mykonos and wherever else they want to go at the moment with all their money. How does that make sense?
Well, that's because our priority when it comes to cost of living relief is people on lower incomes. So that's been our priority for some time, and that's our priority in the May budget when it comes to cost of living relief.
But the Treasurer does have a positive message to share when it comes to the fight against inflation. You probably get more data than anyone on this stuff. Do you think we've hit the inflation peak?
That's our expectation, yeah. We think that it's most likely that inflation peaked at Christmas time and has started to moderate, but we won't know until we get that next set of data.
You think we might be through the worst of it?
Well, I think inflation is starting to come off, but even as it moderates, we can't be complacent about it because it's still going to be a challenge in 23, just like it was in 22.
You paint a picture that we've turned a bit of a corner and there are better times ahead, but the people we're speaking to, I mean, even when I look at my own mortgage bill, we're not feeling it.
Yeah, I understand, and I think that certainly the Prime Minister understands and the government understands that people are under real pressure now. We're doing what we can to deal with it within the constraints of a responsible budget.
The Reserve Bank is expected to announce another interest rate hike on Tuesday, and of course there's the potential for further rises in the months to come. But perhaps the most critical date to keep an eye on is April 26. That's when our next set of quarterly inflation figures will be revealed, and we'll know if Australia's economic situation is finally heading in the right direction. But for couples like Nick and Sam Knoll, there is little relief in sight. I mean, it looks like there will be another interest rate rise this week, and probably another one after that. Where does that leave you?
I'd say it leaves us worried. I think scraping the bottom of the barrel at the moment. Worried as to where it's going to end.
Hello, I'm Tom Steinfort. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our extra minutes segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au, as well as the 9Now app.